Please join me in welcoming Republican candidate for President of the United States, Dr. Ron Paul.
I appreciate very much the invitation to come and visit with you. Somebody asked me whether I had a special speech for your group, and I say no, it's the same speech I give everywhere. And I'm delighted that so many of you have been interested in the campaign, because it's merely standing up for our Constitution, and we stand up for our Constitution. It protects all Americans.
Yeah!
Went into Congress many years ago. I became concerned about the monetary issue, and that prompted me to go into Congress in '76. As a consequence, we were having an economic crisis due to the guns and butter philosophy of the 1960s. I served 5 years in the military in the 1960s. I was drafted during the Cuban crisis, so it was at the height of the Cold War at that time. And it was a lesson for me because at that time the Soviets had 40,000 nuclear weapons and missiles aimed at us, and we had a confrontation over Cuba. And it taught me a lesson. I figured, you know, if under those conditions we were able to talk to Khrushchev, and even Kennedy was able to talk to Khrushchev on that event in October of 2002, we certainly ought to be able to talk to third world nations that don't even have nuclear weapons. Why can't we talk to people?
Right.
But after serving Congress for 8 years, I did go back to my medical practice, and I got interested again, talking about the finances, but also much more so in these later years of dealing with foreign policy. But it turns out that foreign policy and excessive spending in order to maintain an empire has financial consequences. If you study economic history and the history of empires that come and go, empires that overextend themselves eventually go bankrupt.
That's right.
And they destroy their currency. So think of what we're doing to ourselves today. We have a debt increase, an obligation to our kids of over $500 billion every single year. We have entitlement obligations of nearly $60 trillion that the young people can't possibly pay. And we have a system today that has engendered our occupying now, or at least being in, over 130 countries. We have 700 bases around the world. And we're going broke. And how does this reflect on us? Well, right now, what's happening to our dollar? Our dollar is going down because we can't pay for it. So it's an unwise monetary policy. I've always been a believer in sound money and the Constitution, which means that we should never allow our government to print money out of thin air. When governments can create inflation and create money out of thin air, what it does, it leads to governments doing things they shouldn't be doing. Fighting wars that they shouldn't fight, and getting involved in the welfare system that they shouldn't be involved in. And this has certainly been the case. And today, with this overextension, we now face serious problems. We face the problem of how are we going to maintain what we're trying to do overseas? How are we ever going to get our budget under control? And above all else, how are we going to reverse this trend that under this psychology that we have built up, this fear that we have built up among the American people, that everything has to be done because there may be a terrorist around every corner, and therefore we are, as Americans, supposed to sacrifice our civil liberties. And I don't believe we ever should have to sacrifice our civil liberties.
That's right.
Now it is said that we have a perpetual war going on, and that is what is so scary. In the past, during wartime, we have violated civil liberties, whether it was World War I or World War II, but generally they were reversed to some degree. This time, people are more concerned about our loss of civil liberties because it seems to be more permanent. The changes, this attitude that we have allowed our government to accept, the change in attitude about habeas corpus. This is horrible, to think that an American citizen can be hauled into court, declared a potential enemy combatant, and never have due process in court, reversing not only our 200 years of history, but essentially 800 years of history where it took so long to develop this principle of habeas corpus. That we have to reverse.
Yeah.
But the war has been going on a good while now, and it's very, very costly. It's costly on civil liberties. It's the cost of loss of life here for our military personnel, and the loss of innocent lives in the countries that we invade, whether they're innocent lives in Afghanistan or Iraq, and the potential loss of what might happen on an invasion or a bombing in Iran. And the same thing's going on with Iran now, exactly what was going on prior to Iraq. I think the war machine, the war propaganda is in full mode right now to condition everybody to be ready because the bombs may drop soon. I think that's one of the reasons why oil right now is $92 a barrel, because there is this anticipation, and behind the scenes there's a lot of talk about this. The conditioning of the American people is equivalent to the conditioning that happened 6 or 8 months before the invasion of Iraq occurred. But for us to be so fearful and so intimidated from a country, whether it's Iraq or Iran, that they might attack us? I mean, how are they going to attack us even if they had a nuclear weapon? How or why would they attack us? This whole thought that all of a sudden Iran is the Hitler of the day, that we have to orient ourselves and do everything in attacking this country, and that is not for me to defend that country or their leadership. There's a lot of bad people over there, but my concern is making sure that we don't have bad policy in this country. That's our responsibility. So what we must do is think about overall foreign policy. There's a lot of suggestions of what we should do with Iraq. A lot of tinkering, move the troops here, move the troops there, cut the troops here, or add some troops here. My position is quite different. I approach it from a strategic viewpoint, from a historic viewpoint, from our history and our Constitution. And that means that the advice of the Founding Fathers, I believe, was absolutely correct. And that is, don't get involved in the internal affairs of foreign nations. Mind our own business.
Yes.
We as Republicans over the years have benefited from this position. The old traditional right of the Republican Party took this position that we shouldn't be involved. It was the Republicans that actually had to be called in office when the Korean War couldn't end. The same thing after Vietnam. And just think, our current president in the year 2000 ran on the program of no nation building, a humble foreign policy, diplomacy, and talking to people. And yet, what has happened? Exactly the opposite. And now we're engaged because of the advice of the neoconservatives who have hijacked our foreign policy, that we as Americans are expected that we are so good and so wonderful and so perfect that we have the responsibility of forcing our way on other people, even if it takes killing them to make them live like we do. I think it's an insane foreign policy.
Amen.
Right.
So what would we do if we had a non-interventionist foreign policy? Well, to begin with, we'd bring our troops home.
Amen.
All of them. Bring them home from We bring them home from Korea. How long they have to be there? They were sent over there when I was in high school, and they're still there. And I understand South Korea is doing rather well. I mean, their economy has picked up, and I think they're a little bit stronger than North Korea. I think they can take care of themselves. How long do we have to subsidize Europe? We're going broke. I would say bring the troops home from Europe. Does that mean that we want to be isolationists and not talk to people? No, exactly the opposite. It's just that we don't want to force our way on people. In Washington, too often we have only two choices. We either bomb people and tell them they'll do as we tell them, or we have to subsidize them and give them all their foreign aid that they want. I would say there's a third option, and that is to talk to people, trade with people, be friends with people, try to influence the world through a voluntary means. Set good examples.